Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Stuckey, the Irrigation Association's Education Manager. And I'm pleased to welcome you to our second Manufacturer Series webinar of 2022. Today's webinar, titled Benefits of Mobile Mapping, is sponsored by HydroPoint Data Systems. An EPA WaterSense Partner of the Year, HydroPoint combines IoT technology, data analytics, and automation to optimize irrigation flow management and leak detection. Its solutions deliver visibility and control to commercial, government, education, and community sites. To learn more about these award-winning technologies, please visit their website at hydropoint.com. Before we start the presentation, I would like everyone to know that this session is being recorded and that all attendee microphones will be muted. This particular webinar is worth 1 CEU. By navigating to the certification tab on IA's website and locating the Submit CEUs option, you can easily record your credits earned. For those of you that are unfamiliar with our web address, it is irrigation.org. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. The presenters will do their best to answer them before the end of the webinar. Our speakers today are Senior Vice President of the Business Development, Ben Slick, and User Experience Designer, Lance Elliott. Ben's responsibilities include business development, strategic partner relations, and key customer accounts. While Lance's main objective is to use his industry knowledge to improve the user friendliness of HydroPoint products. Without further ado, I'd like to give these gentlemen the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll start with some introductions. Ben, if you'd like to tell us about yourself.
Welcome in, everybody. Nice to be with you. My background is HydroPoint for 17 years. I came in very early to the company. And prior to that, I was a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. So all the databases, networks, embedded softwares, things that run our platforms today are things that I sold in a different life. But through customers and partners, I've been given a great education on irrigation as a practice. And I got to admit, I love it. And so looking forward to spending time with you today.
Yeah, definitely. My name is Lance Elliott, and I'm the user experience designer and product manager for mobile at HydroPoint. I've been with HydroPoint a total of over 5 years, but prior to that, I was born into the world of irrigation. My grandfather started an irrigation company in Birmingham, Alabama, 1964-ish. And soon after, my uncle and father began doing that as their full-time job. My father did residential, my uncle commercial. And so I was always playing on pipe pallets and with sprinkler heads growing up, and ended up right out of high school working full-time, doing irrigation, all the service work for those systems for around 15 years. And then I remember one day I was installing, I think it was a I-20, and I look and think, thought to myself, I wonder if they'd be crazy enough to hire me. And so I reached out and began eventually to experience the world of air conditioning, and have been working with Hunter Industries, and then now with HydroPoint, and I've enjoyed the taking those years of experience and then kind of trying to use that towards what we're working on today, which kind of leads into our topic, which is mobile mapping. And so what is mobile mapping? And so the mobile mapping is when the specific components can make up the irrigation system are marked on a map using a mobile application. Of course, with that goes along GPS. And this map can then be referenced in the future to aid in the maintenance and management of the system. But I believe it could be a lot more. And so, Ben, we're going to go over some challenges today that businesses face, just a few of them. And if you wanted to kind of touch on this first one, that challenge of working and maintaining aging irrigation systems.
Human beings have been creating maps for, thousands of years, how to get it from point A to point B. I mean, if you go back 20 years in our society, if you traveled anywhere for a sales call or for a job interview or to visit family and you didn't know where they lived, you'd spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get from the airport to that spot.
Yeah.
Whereas now today, when you fast forward with smartphones, you literally have lost the ability to read a Thomas Guide or a AAA triptych or what are those things, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
phones tell you where to go, turn left, turn right. Waze is a integral part of how we do things, right? So mapping in general provides all kinds of value, mostly around saving people time. And that goes right to this very topic we're going to talk about today, which is if you don't know where things are on a campus of any size, taking time to go look for them and find them is a waste of your time, and it's not good for your mental health either. So hopefully these tools will make you more efficient and more productive as we start this journey together.
Yeah, it takes me back to the map books and having a few of those in the truck, and you break it down to that little quadrant, and eventually you just memorize the town. But now I don't think I could make it to the grocery store and back without relying on a on a Waze or something. But so yeah, let's just kind of set the stage. It's systems installed, we're dealing with systems that are installed 10, 20, 30 years ago, and they're still in operation, and maintaining these, it's unavoidable, and it's super challenging because the older they get, the more likely the components will fail. And since this is not something that we can go and just replace. It's not like we can bring in a new HVAC unit and replace the old one. We have to kind of take things as they go, one by one, or in some cases we can address them in sections. But irrigation systems are just unlike any other system on a property. It was, having worked as a technician myself, it dawned on me once that just how different and challenging my job was from other repair folks in other industries. Because as a irrigation technician, we have to kind of play this role of being a detective, a deductive reasoner, an electrician, a plumber, a project manager, a consultant. There's just so much involved there. But why is that? It's because every one of these systems is different. It's unpredictable. You have no idea what you're going to confront when you approach an old, or any system for that matter, especially the ones that are a bit older. They're custom built. So there's thousands of parts that are assembled by hand. Each one of those could be a point of failure. They function both hydraulically and electrically. So that's another interesting element to it. You need to understand that plumbing side and that electrical side as well. The vast majority of it is buried, and there's minimal points of accessibility. We have a valve box if we're lucky to find it. There's a controller. We can see the tops of some sprinkler heads, but that's really our exposure to it. Everything else is underground, exposed to the natural elements. Plus, there's these forces that are working against it. We have pressure, temperature, there's friction, gravity, all these things that are playing a role in potentially making that irrigation system not function. But like I said, the majority of those major components there will inevitably fail. But also, we are delivering this limited natural resource and we don't want to waste it. So that's managing and maintaining it is so critical. In addition to that, it's delivering this life-giving resource to plants and landscape that depend on it to survive. And it's not easy to operate. I think it's not something, the learning curve is steep. And especially if you're going to do service work, it even takes it to another level. And then lastly, we rarely do, is there anything for us to reference? So we walk up to these things and we are kind of on our own. And because of this, I think that's why mapping is just more important than we realize. Because I think of it like a tool that it benefits everyone involved. It makes money, it saves time, it can create business, boosts morale, educates us, verifies, trains, etc. It's very, very important. But if we're looking back in time at, let's say, the systems that were built in the 90s, what would we expect to find if we were to visit a site for the first time, we're lucky if there's an original design that we can reference to kind of get an idea of what the intent of the system was. But we're really lucky if there's an as-built. But of course, that would be likely handmade, and if it's laminated or in several pieces, if it's available at all. Or you might find little rusty flags and whatnot out in the field that you can, some clues that have been left behind. And then occasionally you get that kind of wise sage person who's worked there for 20 years and can tell you whereabouts certain things are. But the odds are, of course, you're left alone. And then when we get into the 2000s, where GPS became that solution was kind of more in reach, we began to see some of these appear, but to create them, it was time consuming and costly. But I can remember getting my first little handheld GPS unit, maybe around 2000, 2001. And I was all excited because I thought I could, write down this longitude, latitude, and I could start marking things. But, the ones that I could afford, the accuracy just was disappointing. So I'd come back to the spot I thought I was in, but I was really about 50 yards away from the location. But also we kind of found this, GIS, the geographic information systems, and CAD were more prevalent. And so you were beginning to kind of see some of these coming to fruition. But even then, like I mentioned, preparing the GPS unit, standing over the component, getting the longitude, latitude, taking that data, you'd have to go back to computer, dump it in, and then build the map. But January 9th, 2007, I think changed everything for us, because that was the introduction of the iPhone. And then we have millions of people holding GPS units in their hands for the first time. And now there was this kind of app ecosystem for us to build on. But it took a while. Like our industry, I think if you were to fast forward now, we are finally in a point where we have, the entire planet in our hands in detail. We are beginning to see applications, and there's lots of them. I was just looking into it, for all various types of industries, where there's some mapping tools that are available. And I think we're seeing it, of course, coming into our industry more than ever as well, at various degrees. But Ben makes a great point kind of regarding maps, and I thought you could touch on these two in the differences between them.
Yeah, I mean, where you've got simple stuff for kids, where you can dig a treasure map up and give it to a kid for a birthday party and let them follow it around and teach them mapping skills. Or, how war was waged before we had GIS, right? I mean, maps were supply lines and troop fortifications and, transportation routes and, all kinds of things, right? And so these old mapping tools just, when you fast forward to where we are today, they seem so relic. But what you ideally want, in a map today is that it's a living, breathing, somatic thing you can interact with, right? That, in an ideal world, a map would follow you as you walked around, and then you could, wherever you were, know what's around you based on how it was mapped. So we'll talk more about how we get to that state.
You said it great. I like the idea of living in that, because that kind of is a good segue into how we approach that with WeatherTRAK mobile. And so what I thought I'd do is just bring the actual app onto the screen and talk about that, because I think, like you said, it doesn't mean that this map has to be created all at once, and in this idea that you build upon it. So let me just do this. I'll show you, we've got a controller here on the screen. I'm gonna select that controller, and we have kind of the traditional list of stations, and this can be used as a remote. I could turn on these stations from here, but I can go to the map side of things. And what you're seeing here, let's just kind of imagine this as it's an older system that we're managing, and that we've been kind of placing these assets on a map as we get familiar with it. Like you said, it's a living map. We have a starting point, and over time, as we're beginning to know the site and discovering things, we're just making it a point to place these on the map. One of the things also that being that there's a WeatherTRAK controller, kind of adds some additional capabilities that we can do when it comes to the map itself. So
you can easily at this point see the difference between that Napoleon battle map and what Lance is showing you. You know, you needed to be physically in possession of the battle map for it to have any value to you at all. But with these new mapping tools, because they're cloud-based and hosted, anyone with any device with the proper logins can get access to this. And so you've suddenly democratized access to these mapping coordinates, tools, et cetera, to a wide variety of folks.
Right. And so just, moving around the map and seeing, let's just interact with some of these. We have an asset that is marking a valve, and then we can add photos, information about the valve. There's an asset to the side here that's marking an issue. So here's an I-20 that needs replacing and also lowered with a photograph attached to that. There's and one of the things that we have that I think's unique is that in addition to placing a valve, which we can place an asset that represents where the watering will occur, which is usually not where the valve is located, or in many cases, so that we can actually interact with that and operate that station right from the map as well. So what is also really powerful, I think, and well, for example, why don't we just add an asset? So let's say that we've found a splice box here in this median that is feeding some valves over here. And we're going to hit the plus button. We'll place that splice box. One thing that's interesting too is that GPS, the accuracy of the GPS is really contingent upon the phone that you have, and the signal of the cell signal, and believe it or not, Wi-Fi, if that's connected, can also play a role. So with it's important, and how we've addressed that is just giving the people the ability to fine tune the placement of the asset by dragging it to the spot on the map itself where it should be placed. And then once that's done, let's say we commit to that, and we're going to take a picture of that. So I've got take a photo here. I have a real valve box that I can take a picture of. Great. And then we're going to assign this to a controller because the wires in this splice box are heading to this single controller we have on our site. I think the most important part is just think about the description and what you could tell somebody, a future person that comes up to this asset, and say that these wires feed stations 23 through 29. And as simple as that, if we were to save this, now the next person that comes back and finds this splice box, and just to show you how even on our web version, we are able to, we just refresh that page, because now somebody in a desktop environment could come to this site and then see this splice box that we just added there, which is awesome. And now returning back to this, let's say that's a week, 2, 3 later, a year later, and it's an entirely different person. When they interact with that, they're like, oh, the wires feed stations 23 to 29. And whatever else, other information I want to put there. I mean, that is just a really powerful. I would have loved to have that kind of information years ago, and something that seems so so simple.
So from Lance's ground approach, tagging these assets by standing over them and using a mobile app to geolocate them and place them on a web-based map that then is extensible. What you're doing is you're helping your own cause managing a site. You're helping your own company, who, when labor forces change, a grounds crew gets promoted or transferred to different accounts. They don't have to spend time relearning the site. The asset owner gets the benefit of having a corporate memory where all of her assets live on her site, so that she doesn't have to pay to train someone else. They're already there. So the benefits are, time saving for everybody involved, but it's not just the landscape maintenance provider that gets benefits, it's also the property owner.
Absolutely. That's a perfect way to kind of close that that kind of scenario out, because it is. I mean, you like you mentioned earlier, this building this living map of something that had been installed, 2 decades ago, and then being able to reference that is super, super powerful. Kind of leads us really to the next challenge, and that is, and you just spoke to it to a degree, which is just dealing with personnel changes and just how an organization has to how you plan around that. I mean, what kind of speak to that challenge, and then we can kind of see how this is going to affect that.
So let's use a multifamily property as an example.
Mhm.
You've got a community manager, and her job is to rent and evict and collect, but also to process the comings and goings of all the people. And she manages the budgets, and she manages the vendors that come on site. She does RFPs and maybe makes vendor changes.
Mhm.
There's this building superintendent who fixes stuff that goes wrong in unit or maybe outside, the pool, the waste systems, whatever, right? And then you've got landscape contractors who are managing the site for the property manager. Any of those 3 people at any given time could be changed,
Right.
based on promotion, job transfer, leave of absence, and then, retraining, re-educating, reorienting those people without tools is very time consuming, right? So, and then if you think of an apartment community company who owns 100 of those,
Mhm.
so 100 times 3 people that could all be changed out, you're looking at managing change at scale, which without tools like this could be truly problematic and very wasteful. So
Absolutely.
as an outcome for the customer or an outcome for the maintainer, providing these robust maps that make everybody more efficient
Yeah.
allows you to do more with the same or do more with less.
Mhm. And I just noticed a question came through, and a really good question, and that is, what if our sites do not have updated GPS maps? Where I'm from, our Google images are 5 to 10 years old. How do we integrate this for this type of application? That is a really good question, and one that we are at the mercy of these maps that are provided to us. In this case, Google. There are a few others, and they are provided to us for free. So we are kind of at the mercy of when they choose to update those. So I don't have the best answer to that, but what I can say is that even in a map situation like this, and granted the satellite imagery is let's just imagine what you're speaking to, that this isn't updated. This is a vacant lot, and in reality there's a building here. There is the ability to go to the kind of generic or vanilla map way. So you're not as ideal, of course, than having an accurate, or at least somewhat accurate, depiction of the property from the satellite view. But this is an option, and I want to look into that, because I don't know how. There are some things I've seen where people can take some data and kind of overlay it onto certain mapping systems. So, but again, it's how do you where and how do you, what resource do we have to get an accurate aerial shot of that area? So
Whether the map was taken from space when the plot of land was ready to be built, and so it was scraped earth with boundary markers, but it hadn't put up any buildings or landscape yet. Independent of that, geotagging the assets where they sit, applied to that map will still give you a very reasonable sense of where things are located until that map gets updated. So
very true. Right. I mean, you can, the position of that valve, even if you don't have the imagery around it to kind of support it, is still the position of that valve. So you can find your way to it.
Yep.
But in this case, with us, we're just pulling from Google Maps. So these are maps that are provided from Google. But that's a great question. So kind of going back to this challenge that you just spoke to, Ben. let me, it's kind of been said that you can't manage what you don't measure, but I think, similarly, you can't maintain properly, what you don't map. For example, let's say an irrigation system that had the same company maintaining the same site for a decade. They might have a dozen people interacting with that over a period of time, maybe more. And so the knowledge gained about the irrigation system, well, it's going to be in fragments. It's in each person's mind. No way to really assemble that into some complete picture. It's lost if the person leaves the organization. That has to be rediscovered and relearned unnecessarily each time. And then it can be misrepresented and miscommunicated. I can remember often getting calls on the walkie-talkie for somebody saying, hey, do you remember where the cutoff is at such and such place, and stuff like that. And, if I wasn't available, they'd be standing there. I can remember that, waiting an hour for me to answer. So yeah, so let's kind of look at it.
And many times there may be at a controller a printed map that identifies which zones, when you turn zone 1 on, what is it watering? But those maps get wet and the ink runs, or they get blown away. They age and fade. So even that best practice, when that was what was available, can be quickly outdated and
so true.
useless if you don't have something more advanced.
You reminded me. Remember, in the 80s, when you'd leave notes in lockers, you'd write a note and I would leave notes to myself, my future self, about fold it up, put it in the controller, and then years later come back and go, oh, thank you. And, here's where the sleeve's located or something like that, to help you. Well, yeah, let's just kind of think of it now. Let's kind of imagine if we're a technician and we're addressing a fault on a station, the traditional way, traditional irrigation system. We're going to, when we determine or find this, who knows, it could be the next time we check the system, or worse, a customer calls and says, this area is dying. We're going to go and verify that, get a multimeter, check to see if there's electrical short, verify that there is. If we know how to use one, we're going to get our wire tracer of choice and get out there and begin that hunt. And that could take us a little bit of time, but I think anyone who's ever done this will know that that's rare, and that it could even be hours of troubleshooting to eventually land on a valve and find that valve. Now, when you find it, do you have the parts? And if you don't, then that's going to merit a trip to go get it. So that either needs to be done now, or you're going to have to plan and come back to the site another day to do it. And then don't forget, we have to also know where the cutoff is in this scenario. So that's another thing that could be, we could be spending quite a bit of time digging around for if we're not familiar with the location. Now, if we were kind of employing what we just talked about, mobile mapping, what would we have done differently? Well, we might have had to have gone through everything I just explained, but when we found the control location, we'd be placing that controller on the map. If we would provide details about that controller, brand, station count, condition, we're going to put the valve box location. We're going to look for that. We're going to, the valves, is it manifold, or just anything that might be of use, we're going to be capturing. And of course, the cutoff location, we'd be placing that on the map, because we don't want to have to do that again, or our teammates ever have to go through what we just did to address that. So now let's kind of think of it differently. We'll go through that same scenario, but not only with mobile mapping, but just with how modern day smart irrigation systems like our WeatherTRAK system, and how that would work in that scenario. And so it's also pretend like this is the first time the technician has ever been, this is his first week on the job, and they've never been to that site before. Well, first of all, if there's a fault in that station, we're going to get an alert, and that's going to be texted to us or emailed to us and notifying us that there's an issue, and we'll know immediately. We are able then, because our fellow teammates have already been to that system site, they've already thoroughly mapped it. We know the specifics. We're able to pull up that and go directly to that station 42 and get an idea of the brand and what we might likely need to address that. We'll then swing by when we go to the site before going there, pick up the part that we need if we don't have it. And then when we get to the site, we're able to walk to where it is because it has been placed on the map. And we're able to also find the cutoff and make the repair and in a significant less amount of time. So, that workflow was a clear kind of improvement, but I don't think it stops there. And so I want to show you kind of a few other things that we benefit from by mobile mapping. And let me pull the phone back here for you to see, and we'll go back to our location that we were at, our pretend spot. So first of all, I think one really powerful part of mapping and in knowing the locations of the stations is to rethink how you do an inspection or a wet check. So in the past, you walk up to a controller and you go to station 1 and you just think sequentially. And station 1 though could be here. And then when we go to station 2, it's here, and station 3 is here, so on and so forth. And you just are going on this wild goose chase, walking around a property. But if you think about it, let's imagine that we've parked ourselves right here in this parking lot. And here's a station right here. We have that station location asset, and I were to press that, it's station 16. I would have never logically started with station 16, but that's where I am. And it makes sense now for me to go ahead and start that station. And as I move forward, I'm going to now move to station 20. And as I keep walking, I'm moving to station 17. Here's a station. So I'm doing this geographically and not thinking about it sequentially any longer. And especially if you're on a site with multiple controllers, you're not really even thinking controllers. Like there's 2 or 3 controllers, and now these stations, for whatever reason, would be on one of each of those controllers. Say hypothetically, I'm just walking the area and checking it. I'm not thinking about this is on controller A, that's on controller B, and this is on controller C. I'm just what also I think because of that, and in this I've kind of it's been an eye opener for me because I wish I could go back in time and tell myself this, but because you know where the location is, you don't have to name the station any longer based upon some cryptic message to somebody on how to find it. Like it's east of the west side of the southern part of the north building, and between these 2 roads, and it's water and grass. I think what happened, because it was such a challenge to name stations, because I was always thinking I'm going to name them, try to tell somebody where it is, that you just wouldn't name them. And so instead you had station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that was your station names. But I've seen customers beginning to think of station names differently and creating almost like a little code, little acronyms that describe the station. In this example, you see it's grass, rotors, I-20, full circle, PEB 2. So I know that we have I-20s, full circle, PEB valve, 2-inch. It's water and grass. So I've defined that station. There's so much information in that name now that even if I just saw it, I know what I probably need with me before I get there if I were to just be addressing that station. And so I think that naming now has taken on a new way of really using names more importantly. I think it encourages faster programming changes based on our observations, because as we're walking the site, we're seeing things. We can quickly go to station 16, and we can then go to the programming elements and tweak it. Let's change our percentage adjust the precipitation rate, and so on and so forth. So I think that that really does change things. And then lastly, we can begin to mark things that are on the site that might need to be addressed, as I showed you with that custom asset here. And so I said, these are more examples of kind of how mobile mapping can make an impact, I think, on how a site is maintained, because it benefits the new employees, right, as much as it does the ones who have been with the company for years. And so then that, I think, looking back at what we said earlier, if we were to take the same scenario now and that knowledge that we've gained about the irrigation system if we're employing mobile mapping, now the map and the details are being recorded, and each time those fragments are kind of adding up to build a complete picture. And it's available now for everyone to reference over time. But even if a person leaves the organization, it's discovered once and then documented, and it's presented clearly, but it enables team members to plan and be prepared. And then when we kind of look at the two scenarios, you can see a significant amount of time can be saved. And that's just at one valve, one time, right? So yeah, I think that just
When
really
you
is.
think about this kind of time savings, think of it from the CEO's perspective of the landscape company. So you go back one slide, Lance, and you look at that. Without a map, it's a potentially 4-hour workflow, whereas with a map, it might be an hour workflow. And if you multiply that times 100 maintenance accounts, you're already constrained by human capital. It's really difficult to hire and train people fast enough in our business to bring them on board and get them productive, right? And so if they're spending time on things that aren't productive in any way, it's hurting the firm. It's hurting their ability to get more customers, or
Right.
Do the work quicker to get to more work at the site, or to do other things that just weren't hunting and gathering, right?
Ah,
So
right.
it just makes things more efficient for
It
the
does.
landscape company to operate itself.
And we've got some good questions I thought we could address. We've got one asking if HydroPoint allows us to bring in overlay our own static maps versus Google's, and we don't have that option now. Something that if we was definitely something to look into if we had people who really showed, because I can see with the example that was brought up earlier, there are situations where the mapping data isn't available. So that's definitely something for us to look into, but we don't. Then there's let's see, the same question: can you use your own images and such as aerial? Not yet. And then okay. So that's good. Good question. Something for us to consider, because there are those situations where that might definitely be important. All right. So yeah, you touched on kind of summarizing that, Ben. I think we go into this next bit. It's really about how speaking to how we differentiate ourselves in our businesses from other businesses. So maybe if you were to speak about challenges that LMCs might have just from standing out in the crowd from the ones that they're competing with.
So I think everyone wants to prove that they're different from a competitor. And so there's lots of ways to do that. But I think when you own the water, you really own the account. And when you demonstrate to a client that you're managing the water and the landscape with 21st century tools, and you're using the power of all these IoT-based, GIS-based tools, it gives you a competitive edge against someone who may not perform those same levels of service. And so, it's very easy for a property manager to try to bid her job every year and try to squeeze money out of the contract. And many times, in order to, if she does go with low bid, the person low bidding probably doesn't bring the same level of expertise and tools to the table. And suddenly, what she suddenly realizes is when she's asking them, well, for that same money, you're going to give me this, this, and this, which is what I'm currently getting, and they say no, it will, maybe give her pause to change that out. I think showing the ability to scale and do more work, with the same people, or, everyone, maybe you have to hold prices the same versus raise rates in order to keep the account. But if you're more efficient in the way you manage the account, that holding the same price, you could still maintain profitability. So I think
great points.
What I really look at from a maintenance side is, how can I free up the team from doing the traditional maintenance that might even be break even, to find ways to bid extras, which is where the profitability really comes to the account, right? So how could I change nozzles? How could I put in pressure regulation? How could I recommend hydrozoning and maybe plant pallet rotation? These are all things that add value to the client, but also are extras with better margins for the firm.
Definitely. Yeah, you're right. It's like, you can use this tool to maybe turn it into a revenue source, right? It could be a way, like, just if nothing else, to differentiate yourself. It's a tool to either obtain or to retain customers. And so I think, so let's just look at a few examples. These are just food for thought on how to approach this. What
So
if,
Lance, before
yes,
you approach this next slide, I
yeah,
have a good question here for you
awesome, yeah,
from a Mike Kunda. So
excellent.
Mike wants to know, how do we sell that to an owner or management company to invest in this?
It's
Lots of
actually,
owners will
mhm,
think they made the initial investment on the system from whoever installed it.
mhm.
Why should they pay me to create this for them?
Well, that's a great question. And in a way, almost is what I have here on the screen, at least. And it might not answer the why, so we can discuss that. But it's the what part at first. What's reasonable, or what is realistic. In this scenario, it's really about an option that a customer might want to pay. You would offer it to the customer for a price, and what they might want, what that might consist of initially would just be, mapping the locations, points of connection, the controller, weather station. I mean, gosh, a rain sensor alone could be so important, especially if it fails, because of course the system goes out, and you're depending on how it's used, and that could so isolation valves, and I think just any found asset, while performing an initial wet check, if you see something, map it, or potentially just translating an existing as-built. If, let's say that there is an as-built, and this translating that to something that's cloud-based, and putting a price to that, right? Because there's effort involved. And then there's more effort for things like finding valves, because we know that is not reasonable to say, hey, we're going to go out and find all 72 valves in this site. But when it's understood that the time that can be saved, especially if they're paying for repairs, and those repairs, and they're paying, say, time and material, and that mapping would make a significant impact on the time part in the future, so that can be shown, then it's possible the customer will understand that value, especially if you're gonna have a multi-year relationship with them, that initial investment will make a difference. But there's actually a couple other benefits, I think, to the customer on this next slide.
Hey, Lance, on
Yeah,
this, to answer that
absolutely.
particular question,
Sure.
if I'm the asset owner,
Mhm.
and all I have are traditional irrigation timers that don't have web connectivity, there is no
Right.
ability to use a mobile app.
Mhm.
Showing the customer what his landscape management program would look like if he were to upgrade the tools to give him these
Mhm.
things, making you more efficient, making him more efficient, making him more informed, as you guys
Mhm.
work together to make his landscape both efficient and beautiful for the rentability for his asset. But if he already has made an investment in a tool that doesn't yet do these things, he's sitting on power that hasn't been unlocked yet. And so
Mm.
again, showing him, congratulations, you started down the right path. You've
Right.
got, the fundamentals in place because you bought a system that does have web-based tools.
Right.
But you haven't gone, no one has taken this to the next level for you. I'm that firm for you. That helps cement in his mind how you're helping him get the most out of the investment he's already made. I hope that
Absolutely.
answers that question.
That's a great point. Yeah, really good answer. Yeah, and I think some other options or outcomes that the customer can benefit from paying for that to be performed is that they will get a better way of calculating the value of that irrigation system and landscaping on the property. So it could likely increase the value of their property far greater than the cost of the mapping to in the first place, because now there's a representation of what's out there. Like I said, if 98+% is buried, there's it. Then if they were, say, wanting to sell the property, or they were wanting to survey the property and come up with a value of it, not knowing what's out there, then what do you just irrigation system? What number is that when that's being done? So having all of that map, there's
when
a
portfolio owners
Mhm.
of real property look to either hold an asset long because it's a very profitable thing to rent, and so they don't want to sell it, or they might have bought property and are holding it for a 5-year period.
Right.
It's really important for the landscape maintainer to understand what the fund owner's perspective is for the asset, right? So if they're trying to get operating expenses down as low as possible to then lower the cap rate so they can get a better sale at exit, that is a whole different strategy than I'm trying to make my property I'm trying to go from a B to an A property so I can increase my rent, and I can increase my occupancy because I'm a desirable place to be. It really helps to just have the conversation about what the objective is from the asset owner's perspective to help answer those kinds of questions too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, great point. So yeah, in addition to the concept of having a customer pay for it, let's just say it just becomes part of a maintenance agreement that you're offering to use to differentiate yourself from a competitor. Then what then is kind of realistic? What would this map look like realistically? Like we mentioned, the idea of going out and finding 72 valves might not be realistic, but definitely, as we mentioned before, if you're going and doing a walkthrough of a system, then by marking the location of those stations could be done during that process. And the way we have it set up, it takes about a minute per station, if not less, once you get the rhythm down. Marking that point of connection, the controller location, et cetera. And then also just let them know that over time, assets will, as they're being discovered, will be added. So that's a living map as it's growing. The longer you stay on the property, the more it's filling out. But since that's just part of your maintenance agreement, that map could be yours, and it's just not transferable to that customer. So it in a way, it could potentially enable you to retain that property. There's value there that's been built up that they would lose if that account was if you moved on to a new from that property. But just the time it's saving you, the time it's in the way that you can potentially increase profits because you're saving that time. You're saving money on the repairs, and then it allows you to plan better. All that has value to you as a company and as a business that might not be something that the customer is going to be able to understand or even care, but you do, and so that you'll kind of harness that benefits for yourself. And then lastly, there's just a hybrid of that, right? There's what you might offer as free part of your service, maybe very basic stuff. And then at additional cost, they if they want to kind of fill that out, that you could have some prices there for them to kind of choose if they want to make that map more detailed. And can we mark or show coverage area or full zone? I think I know what you're speaking of. That's a great question. And in our case, that is something we're working on, where I think you're speaking of actually the boundary or more polygon type of boundary. So that's definitely, we want to approach that. There are a lot of good ideas around how to approach that. And beyond just putting a shape on the map, there's some exciting thoughts we've had around even making that more powerful. But yes, so that in our case, that is definitely something that's on the horizon. Our first step was just placing that station location asset so we can get a general idea, but we really wanted to make sure that those boundaries are done, and we make that a really seamless tool for the ones that use our app. So and then I think just in summary, Ben, we've got this, we've just kind of discussed a few different options on how to offer this either to a customer for free or for a cost. But either way, I think it is definitely something that isn't the norm. So you are kind of benefiting from that, your business is in having that as part of your offering. And any other closing thoughts with that?
Some maintaining companies strive to, for operational consistency, put the same controller platform across all of their accounts. The benefit obviously is that their people know how to use the same tool no matter which site they go to. but also if the system is operating correctly, any alerts that are generated, whether they're flow alerts or electrical alerts or what have you, get managed at a central location. And so when labor scheduling is created for the day's routes, if they know that the properties are going to go on site, have 3 valve no connects, have 2 high flow conditions on stations that might require, head replacements, proper staffing, proper, tools and parts on the truck, make it, more efficient than having to leave the job site, go to the store, go buy stuff. I mean, you might have all that stuff already in the yard. So having a platform whereby everything is managed in the most consistent and heterogeneous way possible makes the firm more efficient, and then, as a result, helps you stand out more than a competitor who doesn't have that capability or that foresight.
Absolutely. That's great. And what I want to do real quick, I think that everybody will like seeing these. These are actual site maps of some impressive maps done by some of our amazing customers. And I'm seeing a couple more questions that I will get to in a moment as well. But I just wanted you to look at this. Now, this covers multiple blocks. And this is done by a staff that covers that maintains this university. But they have gone through great lengths of capturing all of this, all of these assets, which, we can all agree they depend on this, now, thinking of quick couplers and there's controllers, there's isolation valves, there's storm drains, there's all of these things are marked throughout this large property, and people interacting with this, be it a new person or a person that's been there for years, you can just see the value of something. And yes, it took a lot of time, as they've said, building this out, but all absolutely worth it. And I wanted to show another, I think, that's really impressive. I think this one, I think about, imagine this is a little park, and it's great. All the station locations are mapped and everything, supply spot, and so on. But I mean, isolation valves and so on. But what I thought was really interesting is think about have never been to the site before, not knowing that there's 3 stations on the other side of this little forest. And right tucked in the middle here is this little splice box, which is clearly the wires feeding these stations over here. And just think about having the person that found this and how important that one little splice box in the middle of that forest is. I think that just shows the value. And then also they're mapping trees as well. There's some out here on this property that are important for them to look at and to map. So I think really impressive to see these in action. And what I wanted to do real quick, let's look at the.
We have some more questions, Lance.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. So it looks like Frank Deegan and Rusty James have the same question.
Oh, nice.
And that is this a standalone app, or does it only work with a site that has a WeatherTRAK controller associated with it?
Right now, it works with a WeatherTRAK controller. It's all because it is integrating with the controller itself as far as turning on and off the stations. We're working in the future to make that where this would be something that could be done on other sites that don't, but it is part of the WeatherTRAK central platform. And so what we call sitemap, as you'll see. And so as this app is is used to kind of capture those assets and to reference them, and also interact with the controllers. So the WeatherTRAK central environment is also where that's done, in addition to other options as well. So it all made sense at first to kind of make sure that the WeatherTRAK world, that this functions within the WeatherTRAK world. And then as far as enabling our customers to be able to perform these types of things on sites that do not have a WeatherTRAK controller at the time, is definitely next on our wish list to provide. So,
excellent, Lance. And I think we have time for one last question, one coming from Tony Trevino.
Mhm.
Can we mark or show a coverage area or full zone?
Yes, yeah, and I think that's what I was speaking to earlier. We mark the station location on the map, and we are working towards adding the ability to add polygons to show that exact boundary of the station. We wanted to first of all just get this ability for, as I showed her on the phone, to turn on and off the stations using the location asset, but the boundary portion will come. But we're exploring. We don't make sure it's more than just a polygon. I can tell you that we're exploring some really creative, exciting ways of how that boundary can be used. But at this time we don't have that right. Yes, piping, sleeving, absolutely. The is without question. We want to see the pipes, see the sleeves, see the wire paths. Even imagine breadcrumb trails. What if you could, as you're using that wire locator and it's just leaving a little breadcrumb trail behind you as you're doing that work. So those are all things that are on the absolute wish list for the future. No doubt. So I think we're just about to wrap up here, Ben. I think we have really shown how this will impact people, and I think it's the power of it is obvious. But just to kind of wrap up, now that we're kind of bringing it all together, is just reflect back on it and think about our daily routines and workflows. Any final thoughts there, Ben?
If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So
Mhm.
having a map helps you, be just more productive at a human level.
Mhm.
One other thing is, our mobile app is bilingual. And so if your phone's preferences are set to Spanish, all the language in all these tools will be in Spanish. And so that can also be a benefit to ESL workforce, which is a big part of our industry and how we remain competitive. So just one more thing to think about. And then
Mhm.
we offer trainings, most manufacturers offer trainings. We certainly have the ability to help train on how to do this kind of thing. As a landscape firm might want to partner with us in that, we'd figure out a way to, get training in your hands.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Thank
Yeah,
you for
thanks.
attending, everyone.
Yeah,
And
thanks for letting us spend an hour with you. Thank you.
no, thank you. So thank you for attending, everyone. Please don't forget to check out our website for upcoming webinars throughout the year. A big thanks to Ben and Lance for sharing their knowledge with us today, and to HydroPoint Data Systems for sponsoring the webinar. If you have any questions that we did not answer, please feel free to email them to education@irrigation.org, and we'll pass them on to the appropriate team member. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
you.
Appreciate it.